The restaurant hummed with the quiet elegance that only old money could buy. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in cream linens, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. Wellington sat at his usual corner table, the one that offered a view of the entire dining room while keeping him slightly removed from the general population. His dark suit was custom-tailored, his watch worth more than most people earned in a year, and his expression carried the weight of a man who had built an empire from nothing. Across from him sat his wife, her hands folded carefully over the small swell of her belly. At 5 months pregnant, she glowed with that particular radiance that expectant mothers often possessed, though tonight her eyes held a shadow of worry. She wore a pale blue dress that had never seen before, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that somehow made her look younger than her 28 years. The silence between them had stretched for nearly 10 minutes. Other diners occasionally glanced their way, recognizing from magazine covers and business news segments. He was a fixture in this city, a self-made billionaire who had transformed a small tech startup into a global corporation. People whispered about his business acumen, his ruthless negotiation tactics, his ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. But tonight was not thinking about business. His jaw was tight, his fingers drumming an irregular pattern on the white tablecloth. He had been looking at his phone earlier, scrolling through something that had made his expression darken with each passing second. Now the phone sat face down on the table between them, like a barrier neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Reached for her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. She had known this conversation was coming. For weeks, she had felt the distance growing between them, the way would study her when he thought she was not looking, the questions that hung unasked in the air between them. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that they could get through this evening without incident, that they could pretend for just one night that everything was as it should be. Cleared his throat, and the sound seemed to echo despite the low murmur of conversation around them. Several nearby diners looked up from their meals, sensing something was about to happen. There was an energy in the air, electric and uncomfortable, the kind that made people stop mid-bite and pay attention. A young waitress approached their table, a black woman in her early 20s with kind eyes and a professional smile. Her name tag read in small gold letters. She carried a water pitcher, ready to refill their glasses, but something in its posture made her hesitate. She had worked at the Meridian for 3 years, long enough to read the room, to sense when wealthy patrons were about to cause a scene. And this, she knew instinctively, was going to be one of those moments. Did not acknowledge presence. His eyes were fixed on, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried clearly in the hushed atmosphere. The conversations at nearby tables faltered and died, one by one, as people tuned into the drama unfolding at the corner table. "I want you to tell me the truth," said, each word carefully measured. "Right here, right now, no more lies." His face went pale. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by anyone watching. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she looked down at her plate, at the salmon that had gone cold and untouched. "Look at me," continued, his voice hardening. "You owe me that much at least. Look at me and tell me the truth about that baby you're carrying." The effect of his words was immediate and devastating. The last few conversations in the dining room died completely. Forks were set down with careful precision. Even the soft piano music that had been playing in the background seemed to fade away. The entire restaurant held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Stood frozen by the table, the water pitcher growing heavy in her hands. She knew she should walk away, should give these people their privacy, but her feet would not move. There was something about the woman's face, about the way she sat with her shoulders hunched and her eyes downcast, that made his heart ache. Finally looked up and there were tears shining in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "not here, not like this." "Why not here?" demanded, his voice rising slightly. "You had no problem lying to me in our home, in our bed. You had no problem letting me believe for 5 months that I was going to be a father. So why should I give you privacy now?" A woman at the next table gasped audibly. Her companion, a silver-haired man in an expensive suit, leaned forward with undisguised interest. This was better than any theater performance, more dramatic than any reality television show. This was real life, raw and unfiltered, and they had front-row seats. "I never lied to you," said, her voice barely audible. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks unchecked. "I swear to you I never lied." Then explain this, said, pulling his phone from the table and turning it toward her. The screen displayed what appeared to be a medical document, though could not make out the details from where she stood. Explain how a paternity test that I ordered privately shows that I am not the father of the child you're carrying. Explain that. The words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the entire restaurant. Several people stood up from their tables to get a better view. A young couple near the window abandoned all pretense of eating and turned their chairs to face the scene directly. The D hurried forward, wringing his hands, clearly torn between allowing his most prestigious guest to do as he pleased and maintaining some semblance of decorum in his establishment. Was shaking her head, her hands pressed against her face. "That's impossible," she sobbed. "It's impossible. There hasn't been anyone else. There's never been anyone but you." "Don't lie to me," slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump and clatter. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. "I had 3 different labs run the test, 3 separate tests. They all came back with the same result. That baby is not mine." Felt her heart pounding in her chest. She should walk away. She should let the manager handle this. But something kept her rooted to the spot, watching this woman fall apart, watching her life implode in front of an audience of strangers who would go home and tell their friends about the dinner theater they had witnessed at the Meridian. "How could you do this to me?" continued, his voice breaking slightly. For the first time, the mask of cold anger slipped, and beneath it was pain, raw and real. "I gave you everything, everything you could possibly want. I loved you, I trusted you, and you repaid me by getting pregnant with another man's child and trying to pass it off as mine." "I'm telling you the truth," pleaded, reaching across the table for his hand. He pulled away from her as if her touch burned. "I don't know what those tests say, but they're wrong. They have to be wrong. I have never been with anyone else. Not since the day we met. You have to believe me." "Why should I believe you?" asked coldly. "Give me one good reason why I should believe a single word that comes out of your mouth." Had no answer. She sat there, crying, one hand on her belly and the other outstretched toward a husband who had already moved beyond her reach. The tableau was heartbreaking and felt tears stinging her own eyes. She had served countless couples in this restaurant, had witnessed proposals and anniversaries and celebrations of all kinds, but she had never seen anything like this. Never seen someone so completely destroyed in such a public way. The D finally reached their table, clearing his throat nervously. "Mr. Wellington, perhaps we could arrange for a private dining room if you and Mrs. Wellington would prefer to continue your conversation in a more discreet setting." Did not even look at the man. "We're fine right here," he said flatly. "Unless you're asking me to leave, because I spend more money in this restaurant in a month than most of your other patrons spend in a year. So unless you want to lose that business, I suggest you back away and let us finish our conversation." The D paled and retreated immediately, making apologetic gestures to the other diners, most of whom ignored him completely. They were too engrossed in the drama unfolding at the corner table. "I want a divorce," said, the words cutting through sobs like a knife. "I want you out of my house by the end of the week. You can keep whatever personal items you brought into the marriage, but everything else stays. The cars, the jewelry, the clothes I bought you, all of it. And don't even think about going after my money in court. We have a prenuptial agreement, remember? The one you signed so readily because you claimed you loved me for who I was, not what I had." "Please," begged. "Please just listen to me. I don't know what happened with those tests, but I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, this baby is yours. It has to be yours. There's no other possibility." "There's no other possibility," laughed a harsh, bitter sound. "That's rich. So what? It's an immaculate conception. You're telling me you're the Virgin Mary now." "I'm telling you I've never been unfaithful," said, her voice gaining strength despite the tears. "I'm telling you that I love you and I would never, ever betray you. And I'm telling you that something is wrong with those tests because there is no way that baby isn't yours." Watched the exchange, her mind racing. She had heard stories, of course. Urban legends, really, about paternity tests that came back wrong, about laboratory mix-ups and contaminated samples. But those were just stories, weren't they? Things that happened on television dramas, not in real life. Except here was a woman, sitting in the middle of a crowded restaurant, swearing on her unborn child that she had been faithful. And there was something in her voice, something in the way she met her husband's eyes despite her tears, that made believe her, or at least want to believe her. Pulled out his wallet and threw several $100 bills on the table. "That should cover dinner," he said, standing up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I'll have my lawyer contact you tomorrow to begin the divorce proceedings. You have 1 week to get out of my house. After that, I'm changing the locks and having whatever you leave behind donated to charity." He turned to walk away but grabbed his arm, her fingers clutching desperately at his sleeve. "Don't do this," she whispered. "Please, don't throw away our marriage, don't throw away our family without at least giving me a chance to prove I'm telling the truth." Looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. For a moment, just a moment, his expression softened. Saw the flicker of doubt, the hint of the love that must have brought these two people together in the first place. But then his jaw tightened, and the mask of cold anger slid back into place. "You had your chance to tell the truth," he said, pulling his arm free. "You've had 5 months of chances, and you wasted every single one of them." He walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silent restaurant. Every eye followed him to the door, watched as he paused to button his suit jacket, watched as he disappeared into the night without looking back. The moment the door closed behind him, conversation exploded. Everyone had an opinion, a theory, a judgment to pass. "Poor man," someone said loudly. "Can you imagine? 5 months of believing you're going to be a father, only to find out your wife has been cheating on you." "She should be ashamed," another voice chimed in. "Getting pregnant by her lover and trying to trap a billionaire with it, it's despicable." "I heard that paternity tests are very accurate these days," a woman at a nearby table said to her companion. "There's almost no chance of error, so if 3 separate tests all came back saying he's not the father, well, then he's not the father." Sat alone at the table, surrounded by the whispers and stares of strangers who had already decided her guilt. She made no move to leave, just sat there with her hands on her belly, rocking slightly, as if trying to comfort both herself and the baby growing inside her. Finally moved, setting down the water pitcher on a nearby service station. She approached table slowly, unsure of what she was going to say or do, knowing only that she could not walk away and leave this woman alone in her devastation. "Ma'am," said softly, crouching down beside's chair so they were at eye level. "Can I get you anything? Some water? Or maybe I could call someone for you? A friend or family member who could come pick you up?" Looked at as if seeing her for the first time. Her eyes were red and swollen, her carefully applied makeup streaked and ruined. "He thinks I cheated on him," she said, her voice hollow. "My husband thinks I'm carrying another man's baby, and I don't know how to prove to him that I didn't, that I wouldn't, that I couldn't." "Those tests," said carefully, "is there any chance they could be wrong?" "I don't know," admitted. "I don't know anything anymore. All I know is that I've been faithful to my husband since the day we met 3 years ago. I've never even looked at another man, let alone been with one. But how do I prove that? How do I prove something that should be taken on faith, on trust, on love?" Did not have an answer to that. She was 23 years old, working her way through community college while supporting her younger brother. She had never been married, never been pregnant, never faced anything like what this woman was going through. But she understood betrayal. She understood what it felt like when someone you loved refused to believe you. "My mother used to say that the truth has a way of coming out," said finally. "Even when it seems impossible, even when everyone has already made up their minds, the truth finds a way." Let out a laugh that was half sob. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," said quietly. "She passed away 2 years ago, but she was right about a lot of things, and I think she was right about that." The two women sat in silence for a moment, one kneeling beside the other's chair, both of them aware of the eyes watching, the whispers swirling around them. Then reached out and squeezed hand, a brief gesture of gratitude for this small kindness in the midst of her nightmare. "Thank you," whispered. "You didn't have to be kind to me. Most people wouldn't have been." "Most people are wrong about a lot of things," said, standing up. "Can I at least get you some water for the road? You should stay hydrated, especially with the baby." Nodded and hurried to fill a glass with ice water. When she returned, she also brought a clean napkin and helped wipe away some of the smeared makeup. It was a small gesture, but it was something, and right now something felt better than nothing. As finally stood to leave, gathering her purse and her shattered dignity, made a decision. She pulled out her phone and quickly typed her number on a napkin. "If you need anything," she said, pressing it into his hand, "or if you just need someone to talk to who isn't going to judge you, you can call me." "Okay." Looked at the napkin, then at, and fresh tears filled her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me." "Because I believe you," said simply. "I don't know why, and I know I have no right to say this, but I believe you, and I think you're going to need someone on your side before this is all over. Clutched the napkin to her chest like it was a lifeline, nodded once, and walked out of the restaurant. The moment she was gone, the whispers grew louder, judgments rendered by people who had never lived her life, never faced her choices, never stood in her shoes. Returned to work, clearing the table where and had been sitting. The hundreds of dollars he had thrown down were still there, more than enough to cover the meal they had barely touched. As she collected the bills and the plates, she noticed something small tucked under his napkin. It was a photograph, the kind from an ultrasound, showing the grainy black and white image of a baby growing in the womb. On the back, in careful script, someone had written, "Baby Wellington, 5 months, our miracle." Tucked the photograph into her apron pocket. She did not know why. Could not 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the Meridian, and the story had spread through the city's social circles like wildfire. Everyone who was anyone had an opinion about Wellington and his cheating wife. The gossip columns had picked it up, though they were careful with the details, referring to a prominent businessman and allegations of infidelity. But anyone who moved in those circles knew exactly who they were talking about. Had not expected to hear from again. She had gone home that night thinking about the devastated woman, wondering if she was safe, if she had somewhere to go, someone to lean on. But as her shift at the restaurant ended each night, her phone remained silent. She told herself that was probably for the best. What did she really have to offer someone like Wellington anyway? She was just a waitress trying to make ends meet, not a lawyer or a detective who could actually help. But on the 4th day, as was getting ready for her evening shift, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost did not answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made her pick up. "Hello? Is this?" The voice was soft, tentative, but recognizable despite its fragility. "Mrs. Wellington. Please call me." There was a pause, the sound of breathing, as if was working up the courage to continue. "I know this is strange, and you probably think I'm crazy for calling you, but I didn't know who else to turn to. Everyone I know has already decided I'm guilty. My friends won't return my calls. Has people watching the house to make sure I'm packing and not taking anything that's not mine. And I just keep thinking about what you said about the truth finding a way." Sat down on her bed, her uniform half on, listening intently. "What can I do to help?" "I don't even know," admitted. "I just needed to talk to someone who didn't look at me like I was garbage, someone who might possibly believe that I'm telling the truth." "Where are you staying?" asked. "Are you safe?" "I'm at a hotel downtown. Gave me a credit card for expenses until the divorce is finalized, I suppose out of some remaining sense of obligation. But I can't stay here forever. And honestly, I don't care about any of that. I just want him to believe me. I want to prove that this baby is his." Thought for a moment. Those paternity tests he had done, do you know which labs processed them? "He won't tell me. He says it doesn't matter, that they were 3 independent labs and they all confirmed the same thing. But I've been going over and over this in my head, and it doesn't make sense. The only way those tests could all come back negative is if they didn't test DNA at all, or if they didn't test my baby's DNA. There has to be an explanation." "What if you had your own test done?" suggested. "What if you went to a different lab, one you chose yourself, and had them run the test? If it comes back showing as the father, then something was wrong with his tests." "He would just say I faked it," said, her voice breaking. "He would say I paid off the lab or switched the samples or something. He's already convinced I'm a liar. Why would he believe any test I presented?" Did not have an answer to that. She glanced at the clock and realized she was going to be late for her shift if she did not leave soon. But something told her this conversation was more important than being on time. "Listen," said slowly, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we could figure out what went wrong with tests? What if we could find proof that there was a mistake or that something was tampered with?" "How would we even begin to do that?" asked. "I don't know yet," admitted. "But I have a friend, someone I went to high school with, who works at a medical lab. Maybe she could help us understand how these tests work, what could cause a false result. It's a starting point, at least." There was silence on the other end of the line, and then's voice came through, stronger than before. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything." Thought about that question. Why was she getting involved in the complicated, messy life of a woman she barely knew? She had her own problems, her own struggles. Her brother was struggling in school, her rent was due in a week, and she was exhausted from working double shifts. But when she thought about walking away, about leaving to face this alone, something in her gut told her that would be wrong. Because I know what it's like when no one believes you, said finally. And because I have a feeling about you. My mom always said I was a good judge of character, and my gut tells me you're telling the truth. So if you are, then someone needs to help you prove it. After they hung up, called her friend Maya, who worked as a lab technician at City Medical Center. They had been close in high school, though they had drifted apart over the years as life took them in different directions. But Maya was smart and honest, and if anyone could help them understand what might have gone wrong with those tests, it would be her. Maya agreed to meet for coffee the next morning before shift. They sat in a small cafe 3 blocks from the restaurant, nursing lattes while explained the situation. She was careful not to use names, referring to only as a woman and as her husband. But Maya was sharp enough to read between the lines. "You're talking about Wellington, aren't you?" Maya said, keeping her voice low. "I heard about what happened at the Meridian. Everyone in the city has heard about it by now." Hesitated, then nodded. She says she didn't cheat on him, and I believe her, but I need to understand how 3 different paternity tests could all come back with the same wrong result. Maya stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Okay, so first you need to understand how paternity tests work. They compare DNA markers between the child and the alleged father. These tests are actually extremely accurate when done correctly, like 99.9% accurate. For all 3 tests to come back with the same false negative result, something would have had to go seriously wrong. Like what? Asked. Well, there are a few possibilities. The most obvious would be sample contamination or mix-up. If the lab accidentally tested the wrong sample, or if the samples got switched somehow, that would explain it. But for that to happen at 3 different labs, that's almost impossible unless someone was deliberately tampering with the tests. Leaned forward. Could someone do that? Could someone intentionally make the tests come back negative when they should be positive? Theoretically, yes, Maya said slowly. If someone had access to the samples before they were tested, they could potentially switch them. Or if someone at the lab itself was corrupt, they could falsify the results. But again, we're talking about 3 separate labs. That would require a conspiracy involving multiple people at multiple facilities. What about the way the samples were collected? Pressed. Could that affect the results? Absolutely. If the samples weren't collected properly, or if they were degraded somehow before testing, that could cause problems. But the labs would typically notice that and report it. They wouldn't just run a test on compromised samples without flagging it. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them processing the information. Then Maya spoke again, her voice hesitant. There is one other possibility, though it's a long shot. Sometimes, in very rare cases, there can be what's called a vanishing twin situation. It happens when a woman is pregnant with twins early on, but one of the embryos is absorbed by the other or by the mother's body. If that happens, the surviving child can end up with 2 different sets of DNA in their body, what we call chimerism. I don't understand, said. How would that affect a paternity test? Well, if the baby has DNA from both the absorbed twin and itself, and if the sample happened to test the DNA from the absorbed twin rather than the baby's own DNA, it could potentially give a false result. But this is extremely rare, and I'm honestly reaching here. The odds of this being the explanation are tiny. His mind was racing, but it's possible. Technically, yes. But like I said, it's a major long shot. The much more likely explanation is either sample tampering or some kind of systematic error in how the samples were collected or processed. After her conversation with Maya, called back and relayed everything she had learned. Listened intently, asking questions, trying to understand the technical details. So what you're saying is that either someone deliberately sabotaged those tests, or there was an incredible series of errors across 3 different labs, summarized. Neither of which is likely. Or there's something unusual about your baby's DNA that the tests are picking up, added. That thing Maya mentioned, chimerism, it's rare, but it's possible. How would we even test for that? Asked. I don't know, admitted. But maybe we start by trying to figure out where those samples came from. Did tell you anything about how he collected the DNA for the tests? Was quiet for a long moment. He said he did it himself while I was sleeping. He took a sample of my saliva, I guess, and a sample of his own blood. Then he sent them to the labs. He didn't want me to know what he was doing because he didn't want to give me a chance to interfere. A chill ran down spine. While you were sleeping, that means you never actually saw the samples he submitted. You don't know for sure that they were really your DNA. The implication hung in the air between them. If had wanted to ensure the tests came back negative, all he would have had to do was submit someone else's DNA instead of. But why would he do that? What possible reason could he have for setting up his own wife? No, said firmly. I know what you're thinking, but wouldn't do that. He may be angry with me, he may have convinced himself I'm guilty, but he's not cruel. He wouldn't deliberately frame me. Are you sure about that? Asked gently. Because from where I'm sitting, this whole thing is very convenient for him. He gets rid of his pregnant wife, he looks like the wronged party, and he probably gets to keep most of his money thanks to that prenup you signed. Doesn't need to scheme to protect his money, said. And he wanted this baby. He was excited about being a father. Why would he sabotage his own happiness? Did not have an answer to that. But something about this whole situation felt wrong, like pieces of a puzzle that did not quite fit together. She had learned over her 23 years to trust her instincts, and right now her instincts were screaming that there was more to this story than anyone realized. Over the next few days, and worked together to try to unravel the mystery. Used her breaks at work to research paternity testing, learning everything she could about how the tests were conducted, what could go wrong, and what legal protections existed for people disputing test results. Meanwhile, tried to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the tests. What they discovered was troubling, had been unusually distant for several weeks before confronting at the restaurant. He had been working late more often, taking phone calls in private, acting distracted and preoccupied. At the time, had assumed he was dealing with business stress. His company was in the middle of a major merger, and she knew those deals could be all-consuming. But now, looking back, she wondered if there had been something else going on. Had someone planted doubts in his mind about her fidelity? Had someone convinced him to run those tests? Thought about the scene she had witnessed at the restaurant, replaying it in her mind. There had been something almost performative about Sanger, the way he had ensured everyone could hear him, the way he had made such a public spectacle of his wife's supposed betrayal. It was as if he had wanted witnesses, wanted the whole world to know that had wronged him. But why? The answer came from an unexpected source. One evening, as was cleaning tables near the end of her shift, she overheard two men talking in low voices at a corner booth. They were both businessmen, judging by their expensive suits and the contracts spread across their table. And they were talking about Wellington. I heard the divorce is going to be finalized by the end of the month, one of them said. Fast work even for Wellington. He wants it done before the merger goes through, the other man replied. Can't have any complications with his personal life interfering with the deal. The investors are already nervous enough. Think there's any truth to the rumors about him and Cassandra? Froze, her hand stilling on the table she was wiping. She strained to hear the rest of the conversation without being obvious about it. Who knows, but if there is, the timing works out perfectly for him. Gets rid of the pregnant wife, clears the way for the new relationship, and comes out looking like the victim. It's almost too convenient. Cassandra's been his business partner for years. You really think he'd risk everything for an affair? I think men have done things for beautiful women, and Cassandra Rhodes is definitely beautiful. Plus, she stands to make a fortune from this merger. Maybe they decided to make it personal as well as professional. The men finished their drinks and left, leaving standing there with her mind reeling. Cassandra Rhodes. She knew that name. Everyone in the business world knew that name. She was Wellington's second in command, the brilliant strategist who had helped him build his empire. She was also, according to numerous magazine profiles, single, stunning, and utterly devoted to her work. Could it be possible? Could have orchestrated this entire situation to get rid of so he could be with Cassandra? It seemed like something out of a soap opera, too dramatic to be real. But then again, had witnessed firsthand how dramatic real life could be. She called immediately after her shift. I think I might know what's going on, she said, her words tumbling out rapidly, but you're not going to like it. She told about the conversation she had overheard, about the rumors of and Cassandra, about the convenient timing of everything. Listened in silence, and when finished, she was quiet for so long that wondered if the call had dropped. Cassandra, finally said, her voice strange and distant. He's been spending a lot of time with Cassandra, planning the merger, he said, working late together, going over contracts and strategies. I never thought anything of it. I trusted him. Do you think it's possible, asked gently, that they're having an affair? I don't know, said. I don't know what to think anymore. A week ago, I would have sworn my husband loved me and would never betray me. Now I'm living in a hotel and being called a cheater by everyone in the city. So clearly, I'm not as good at reading situations as I thought I was. If he's having an affair, said slowly, thinking it through, then maybe he needed a reason to divorce you that would make him look innocent. If he just left his pregnant wife for another woman, people would judge him. But if you're the one who cheated, if you're carrying another man's baby, then he's the victim. He gets sympathy instead of criticism. And he could have made sure those paternity tests came back negative, said, following the logic. By submitting false samples or paying off the labs. It sounds insane when I say it out loud, but it makes more sense than any other explanation. We need proof, said. We need to prove that the tests were tampered with or that is having an affair or both. Otherwise, it's just speculation. But how did two women with no resources, no power, and no connections go up against a billionaire who owned half the city? How did they prove that one of the most respected businessmen in the country had orchestrated an elaborate fraud to destroy his wife? Did not know, but as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, she promised herself that she would find a way. Because deserved the truth, and that baby deserved to know who their father really was. And because sometimes, just sometimes, David could beat Goliath if he was smart enough and brave enough. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Called, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. I got a call from his lawyer. They want to move up the divorce proceedings. They're claiming I've been harassing, trying to contact him against his wishes. They're threatening to get a restraining order if I don't back off. Have you been trying to contact him? Asked. I sent him a few texts asking him to please just talk to me to give me a chance to explain. I guess that counts as harassment in his book now. His voice broke. They're going to take everything from me. My marriage, my reputation, my baby's father, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Yes, there is, said firmly. We fight back, we find the truth, and we make sure everyone knows it. Your husband wants this done quickly and quietly. Then we make noise, we make so much noise that he can't ignore us. How? Asked desperately. How do we fight someone with unlimited money and power? Thought for a moment, then smiled. We start by talking to someone who might be willing to listen. Do you know any journalists? Anyone who covers business news or society scandals? I know a few, said slowly, but has relationships with most of the major media outlets in the city. They're not going to cross him for a story that makes him look bad. Then we find someone who doesn't care about his relationships, said. Someone who cares more about the truth than about staying in the good graces of the wealthy and powerful. It took 2 days of searching, making calls and following leads, but they finally found her. Rachel Martinez was an investigative journalist who ran an independent news blog that had gained a significant following for its fearless coverage of corruption and scandal among the city's elite. She had no advertisers to please, no corporate owners to answer to, and a reputation for digging until she found the truth, no matter who it hurt. When and met with Rachel at a coffee shop far from the restaurant and far from his usual haunts, the journalist listened to their story with sharp attention. She took notes, asked pointed questions, and made no promises. If what you're telling me is true, Rachel said when they finished, then this is huge, but I need proof. I can't just publish accusations against Wellington based on your word alone. He'd sue me into oblivion and he'd probably win. What kind of proof do you need? Asked. Medical records, lab reports, communications between and these testing facilities. Phone records showing contact between and Cassandra Rhodes outside of business hours. Financial records that might show payments to the labs. Anything concrete that supports your theory. I don't have access to any of that, said, her shoulders slumping. Controls everything. Then we need to get creative, Rachel said, leaning back in her chair. You said collected the DNA samples himself while you were sleeping, right? That he didn't want you to know what he was doing. That's pretty suspicious behavior for someone who genuinely believes his wife is cheating. He said he didn't want me to have a chance to tamper with the samples, explained. Or he didn't want you to know that the samples he submitted weren't actually yours, Rachel countered. Here's what I'm thinking. We need to force hand. We need to make him produce evidence of these tests, evidence that can be independently. And the best way to do that is through the legal system. How? Asked. Doesn't have money for a big legal fight. She doesn't need money, Rachel said with a slight smile. She needs leverage, and I think I know how to get it. Over the next week, Rachel worked her connections and did her research. What she discovered was intriguing. The merger that was working on with Cassandra Rhodes was worth billions of dollars, but it was also dependent on its reputation remaining intact. The investment firm putting up the bulk of the funding was known for being extremely conservative, extremely risk-averse. They would not touch a deal involving scandal or controversy. If news got out that Wellington might have paternity tests to frame his pregnant wife, if questions arose about his ethics and his judgment, the deal could fall apart. And if the deal fell apart, both and Cassandra would lose millions, possibly hundreds of millions. "That's your leverage," Rachel explained to and when they met again. "Can't afford for this story to come out right now, not with the merger on the line, so we use that. We threat to go public unless he agrees to certain terms." "What terms?" asked. "First, he has to submit to a new paternity test, one conducted by a lab that you choose, with both of you present during the sample collection. No more sneaking around in the middle of the night. Everything above board and verifiable. Second, he has to produce the original test results and documentation from the 3 labs he used, so we can have them independently reviewed. And third, he has to agree not to proceed with the divorce until the new test results come back." "And if he refuses?" asked. "Then we go public with what we know," Rachel said simply. "I published the story on my blog, complete with your side of events, the questions about the test results, and the rumors about his relationship with Cassandra Rhodes. It might not have the reach of the major news outlets, but my readers include a lot of journalists and media people. Once it's out there, other outlets will pick it up, and its carefully crafted image will start to crumble." It was risky. If they were wrong, if could prove beyond doubt that had been unfaithful, then going public would only make things worse. But if they were right, if had indeed orchestrated this whole situation, then they might finally have a chance to expose the truth. Made the decision, let's do it. Rachel drafted a letter, laying out everything they knew and everything they suspected. She made it clear that she was prepared to publish the story unless agreed to the terms they had outlined. The letter was carefully worded to avoid any claims that could be considered defamatory, but the implications were clear enough. The letter was delivered to office by courier, and then they waited. The response came faster than any of them expected. The next morning, received a call from a lawyer she did not recognize. Not's divorce attorney, but someone else, someone whose firm specialized in crisis management and damage control. "Mrs. Wellington," the lawyer said, his voice smooth and professional. "My client, Mr. Wellington, has received your communication. He finds your allegations disturbing and completely unfounded. However, in the interest of putting this matter to rest quickly and avoiding any further unpleasantness, he is willing to consider your request for a new paternity test." His hand tightened on the phone. She had not expected him to cave so quickly. "What are his conditions?" "The test will be conducted at a facility of his choosing, but you and your representative will be allowed to be present during the sample collection. The results will be shared with both parties simultaneously, and you will agree to cease all contact with the media and to sign a disclosure agreement regarding the details of your marriage and divorce." "I want to choose the facility," countered, her voice stronger than she felt. "Or at the very least, we use a facility that neither of us has any prior relationship with, and I'm not signing any NDA until after we get the results." There was a pause while the lawyer consulted with someone, presumably. Then he came back on the line. "My client agrees to use a neutral facility. We will provide you with a list of 3 options, and you may choose from among them. As for the NDA, he requires that you sign it regardless of the test results, or there will be no test." Looked at, who had been listening to the conversation on speaker phone, nodded encouragingly. This was progress. This was movement in the right direction. "Fine," said. "Send me the list of facilities. I'll review them and make a selection. When can we schedule the test?" "As soon as possible," the lawyer said. "My client is eager to resolve this matter. We'll be in touch with the details." When the call ended and sat in stunned silence, it had worked. The threat of exposure had actually worked, was agreeing to a new test under conditions they could verify. "This is good," said, trying to inject optimism into her voice. "This is really good." But looked worried. What if the new test comes back the same as the others? What if I'm wrong? What if there really is something wrong with this baby's DNA? Or what if I'm somehow carrying a baby that isn't, and I don't even know how it happened? "Then we'll deal with that when we come to it," said firmly. "But I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think this new test is going to prove you've been telling the truth all along, and I think knows it, which is why he's trying to make you sign an NDA. He doesn't want you to be able to talk about what he did." The list of facilities arrived by email that afternoon. Forwarded it to Maya's friend from the medical lab and asked her to research each one. Maya reported back that all three were legitimate, well-respected facilities with good reputations. Chose the one that was furthest from his business empire, the one where he would be least likely to have any influence. The test was scheduled for the following Monday. Barely slept the night before, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every potential complication. She had been so certain of her innocence, so sure that she had never been unfaithful, but accusations had planted seeds of doubt. What if there was something she did not know? What if there was some explanation she had not considered? Picked up at her hotel and drove her to the testing facility. They were both quiet during the drive, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, was already there, standing in the lobby. W looked different than he had at the restaurant. The cold fury had been replaced by something harder to read, a careful blankness that revealed nothing. He wore another impeccable suit, this one charcoal gray, and his expression barely flickered when walked through the door with at her side. The unknown man stepped forward, extending his hand first to, then to. "I'm Dr. James," he said. "I'll be overseeing the sample collection today to ensure everything is done according to proper protocol. I'm an independent observer, hired by the court to witness this procedure and verify that nothing irregular occurs." Blinked in surprise. "The court? I didn't know courts were involved." "At my client's insistence," his lawyer said smoothly. "Mr. Wellington wanted to ensure that no one could question the validity of these results. Doctor is a respected expert in forensic genetics, and his presence here guarantees that everything will be conducted properly." Squeezed hand reassuringly. This was actually good news. If was going to such lengths to make sure the test was legitimate, it suggested he was confident in the results. But why would he be confident if he had been tampering with the previous tests? Unless he had not been tampering with them at all. Unless really was carrying another man's child and somehow did not know it. The thought made stomach turn, but she pushed it aside. They had come too far to doubt themselves now. The sample collection itself was straightforward but surreal, and sat in separate rooms, each giving blood samples under doctor's supervision. The samples were labeled, sealed, and documented with such meticulous care that it seemed impossible anything could go wrong. Throughout the process, never looked at, never acknowledged her presence beyond what was absolutely necessary. When it was done, doctor explained that the results would take approximately 5 business days to process. The lab would send the results simultaneously to both parties, as well as to doctor himself for review. There would be no advance warning, no opportunity for anyone to interfere with or alter the findings. As they prepared to leave, tried one last time to talk to her husband. She said softly, approaching him in the lobby, "Please, can we just talk for a minute?" He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her heart break all over again. There was no anger there anymore, no betrayal or hurt. There was nothing. It was as if she had become a stranger to him, someone he had once known but no longer had any connection to. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his voice flat. "We'll have our answers in a few days. Until then, I'd prefer if we had no contact." He turned and walked away without waiting for a response, his lawyer hurrying to keep up. The door closed behind them and stood in the empty lobby, one hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face. "Come on," said gently, taking her arm. "Let's get out of here. 5 days. We can make it through 5 days." But 5 days felt like an eternity when you were waiting for test results that would determine the rest of your life. Spent those days in a state of suspended animation, unable to eat, barely able to sleep. She had moved out of the hotel and was staying with a cousin who lived on the other side of the city, one of the few family members who had not completely cut her off after the scandal broke. Checked in with her every day, sometimes multiple times a day. They had become friends through this ordeal, 2 women from completely different worlds who had been thrown together by circumstance. Found herself caring deeply about what happened to and her baby, invested in a way that went beyond simple compassion. Rachel Martinez, the journalist, was also waiting for the results. She had held off on publishing her story, agreeing to wait until the test results came back. But she had been busy during that time, digging into Wellington's background, his relationship with Cassandra Rhodes, and the details of the upcoming merger. What she found was illuminating. And Cassandra had been working together for 7 years, building his company from a moderately successful startup into a tech giant. They had always been close, often photographed together at business events, but there had never been any suggestion of impropriety. Both had maintained that their relationship was purely professional. But Rachel's investigation had turned up some interesting details. 6 months ago, right around the time would have gotten pregnant, had purchased a luxury condo in the downtown area. The property was registered to one of his shell companies, and there was no public record of anyone living there. But Rachel had talked to people in the building, and they reported seeing both and Cassandra there at various times, usually in the evening, usually alone. Rachel also discovered that the merger deal had hit several snags in recent months. The investment firm had expressed concerns about the company's leadership structure, specifically about the fact that was married and might face complications if his wife decided she wanted a share of the business. In the tech world, high-profile divorces had destroyed more than one promising company. The investors wanted assurance that personal matters would not interfere with the business. It was all circumstantial, nothing concrete enough to prove anything. But it painted a picture of a man who might have had reasons to want to end his marriage quickly and cleanly, with himself positioned as the victim rather than the one walking away. The 5 days crawled past. On the morning of the 5th day, his phone rang at 8:30. She had been awake since dawn, sitting at her cousin's kitchen table with a cup of tea she had not touched, staring at her phone as if she could will it to ring through sheer force of concentration. "Mrs. Wellington?" The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. "This is Doctor from Genesis Medical Testing. I'm calling to inform you that your test results are ready. I'm emailing them to you now along with an explanation of the findings. Do you have any questions before I do that?" His hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "Just send them," she managed to say, "please." "Of course, the email should arrive within the next few minutes. If you have questions after reviewing the results, please don't hesitate to call our office." The line went dead. Sat frozen, staring at her phone, waiting for the email notification. Her cousin had come into the kitchen, drawn by the sound of the phone call, and now stood watching her with concern. "What is it? What did they say?" "The results," whispered. "They're sending the results." Her phone pinged. The email had arrived. For a long moment could not bring herself to open it. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. If the test showed was not the father, then her life as she knew it was over. Her marriage, her reputation, her sense of herself as a person who knew her own truth, all of it would crumble. But if the test showed he was the father, then something else was revealed. Something perhaps even more frightening. That someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make it appear that she had been unfaithful, that her husband had either orchestrated or been deceived by an elaborate fraud. She opened the email. Her eyes scanned the page, looking for the relevant information. There was a lot of technical language, a lot of numbers and percentages and genetic markers, but at the bottom, in bold letters, was the conclusion. Based on the DNA analysis performed, the probability of paternity is 99.99%. Wellington is the biological father of the child carried by Wellington. Read the words 3 times before they fully sank in. Then she burst into tears, sobbing so hard that her cousin rushed to her side, thinking something terrible had happened. But these were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of a truth finally revealed. "He's the father," gasped between sobs. "Is the father. I was telling the truth. I was telling the truth all along." She immediately forwarded the email then to Rachel Martinez. Within minutes, both women were calling her, their voices excited and urgent. "I knew it," said triumphantly. "I knew you were telling the truth. This proves it. This proves everything." "Now we need to figure out what went wrong with those first tests," Rachel said, her journalist's mind already working on the next angle. "Is going to have gotten these same results. I want to see how he reacts, whether he apologizes, whether he tries to explain, or whether he doubles down." They did not have to wait long for an answer. Less than an hour after the results were sent, received a call from his lawyer. "Mrs. Wellington," the lawyer said, and there was something different in his tone now, something careful and conciliatory. "I'm calling on behalf of my client to discuss the recent test results and how we might move forward from here." "You mean now that you know I wasn't lying," said, her voice harder than it had been in weeks. "Now that you have proof I never cheated on my husband." "Mr. Wellington is as surprised by these results as anyone," the lawyer said smoothly. He is currently investigating what might have gone wrong with the previous tests, but in light of these new findings, he would like to propose a reconciliation. Almost laughed. A reconciliation? He publicly humiliated me, called me a cheater in front of dozens of people, threw me out of our home, and filed for divorce. And now he wants to reconcile. My client acted on information he believed to be accurate, the lawyer said. He had 3 separate tests all confirming the same result. Any reasonable person would have drawn the same conclusion. Now that we know those tests were somehow flawed, Mr. Wellington wishes to make amends. I want to talk to directly, said. Not through lawyers, not through intermediaries. If he wants to reconcile, he can tell me himself. There was a pause, muffled conversation in the background. Then's voice came on the line, and's breath caught in her throat. It was the first time she had heard him speak to her with anything other than coldness or anger in over 2 weeks. He said, and there was something in his voice, something that might have been regret. I don't know what to say. I was so sure. The tests all said the same thing, and I thought I had no choice but to believe them. You had a choice, said quietly. You could have chosen to believe me. You could have chosen to trust in our marriage, in the 3 years we've spent together, in the love we said we had for each other. But you didn't. You chose to believe some lab results over the woman you married. I'm sorry, said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. I'm so sorry. I let anger and hurt cloud my judgment. I should have talked to you, should have given you a chance to explain before I did what I did. I just felt so betrayed, so convinced that you had been lying to me. Someone lied to you, agreed. But it wasn't me. Those first tests were wrong, deliberately wrong, possibly, and I want to know why. I want to know who did this and what they hope to gain from it. I've already started looking into it, said. I've contacted all 3 labs, demanding to see their records and documentation. Someone is going to answer for this, I promise you that. And what about us? Asked. What about our marriage? You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You broke something when you accused me in that restaurant. You broke my trust, my faith in you. Was quiet for a long moment. I know, he finally said, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I'm asking you to give me a chance to make this right, to prove to you that I can be the husband you deserve, the father our child deserves. Will you at least think about it? Closed her eyes, one hand resting on her belly. The baby kicked, a small flutter of movement that reminded her what was truly at stake here. This was not just about her and any more. There was a child to consider, a life that would be affected by whatever decision she made. I'll think about it, she said finally. But I need answers. I need to know what happened with those tests, and I need to know that you're going to believe me, going to trust me, even when things don't make sense. Because if we're going to make this work, we need to have that foundation. I understand, said, and I promise you we're going to get to the bottom of this. After they hung up, called to tell her about the conversation. Listened carefully, and when finished, she asked the question that had been nagging at her since the test results came back. Do you believe him? That he's genuinely sorry, that he wants to make things right? I don't know, admitted. Part of me wants to believe him. Part of me remembers the man I fell in love with, the man who was kind and generous and made me feel safe. But another part of me remembers his face in that restaurant, the coldness in his eyes, the way he was so ready to believe the worst of me. What does your gut tell you? Asked. Thought about that. My gut tells me that something is still not right, that there are pieces of this puzzle we're still missing. Those tests didn't just come back wrong by accident. Someone made sure they came back wrong. And until we know who and why, I can't fully trust anything. Then we keep digging, said firmly. Rachel is already working on the story. She's going to publish what we know so far along with the new test results. Once that's out there, maybe other people will come forward with information. Maybe we'll finally get some real answers. Rachel's story went live on her blog that afternoon. It was carefully written, presenting the facts without making direct accusations, but the implications were clear. Wellington's pregnant wife had been publicly accused of infidelity based on paternity tests that had since been proven wrong. Questions were being raised about how such tests could be so dramatically incorrect, and whether there might have been foul play involved. The story exploded. Within hours, it had been picked up by several major news outlets. By evening, it was trending on social media, with people taking sides and speculating wildly about what had really happened. Some defended, arguing that he had been the victim of a laboratory error and should not be for acting on bad information. Others condemned him for not trusting his wife, for making such a public spectacle of the accusation. And a small but vocal group wondered whether the tests had been deliberately, and if so, who had done it and why. His company released a statement saying that the matter was personal and they would not be commenting further. But the damage to his reputation had been done. The merger negotiations, which had been proceeding smoothly, suddenly hit complications. The investment firm wanted assurances that this scandal would not affect the company's operations or stock price. They wanted answers about the false paternity tests and whether himself might have been involved in any wrongdoing. In the midst of all this chaos, a new piece of information emerged. A lab technician from one of the facilities that had processed original paternity tests came forward anonymously, reaching out to Rachel Martinez with a story that changed everything. The technician claimed that the samples submitted under Wellington's name had been flagged as suspicious by the lab's quality control system. The DNA markers had not matched properly, suggesting that either the samples had been contaminated or they were not from the people they were supposed to be from. But when the technician had raised concerns with their supervisor, they had been told to process the samples anyway and report the results as requested. "I thought it was strange at the time," the technician told Rachel in a phone interview. "But my supervisor said the client had specifically requested expedited processing and that we should not delay the results with additional verification. I assumed there was some legitimate reason for the rush, maybe a legal case or something. But now, seeing all this in the news, I realize something wrong happened. And I think my supervisor might have been paid to overlook the problems with those samples." Rachel immediately began investigating the lab supervisor in question. What she found was illuminating. The supervisor, a man named, had recently made several large deposits into his bank account, deposits that far exceeded his normal salary. He had also been in contact with someone from Wellington's company in the weeks leading up to the paternity tests. But it was not that had been in contact with, it was Cassandra Rhodes. The revelation hit like a bomb. Cassandra Rhodes, business partner and second in command, had been in communication with a lab supervisor who had then processed suspicious paternity test samples and reported false results. The connection was circumstantial but damning. Rachel called with the news, her voice tight with excitement. "I think we've found our answer. I think Cassandra Rhodes orchestrated the whole thing." "But why?" asked, though even as she said it, she was starting to understand. "What does she have to gain from destroying my marriage?" "Everything," Rachel said. "Think about it. If you and divorce, he's single again, free to pursue a relationship with her if that's what they both want. But more importantly, if you're out of the picture before the merger goes through, there are no complications with the company ownership or leadership. The investors get a clean, simple business structure with no messy personal entanglements. Cassandra stands to make hundreds of millions from this merger, maybe more. And with single and grateful to her for supporting him through his betrayal. She positions herself as not just his business partner, but potentially his romantic partner as well." Felt sick. Could it really be that calculated? Could someone really destroy a marriage, ruin a woman's reputation, and potentially traumatize an unborn child, all for money and ambition? "We need proof," said. "Suspicions and circumstantial evidence are not enough. We need to prove that Cassandra paid off that lab supervisor, that she deliberately had those false results generated." "I'm working on it," Rachel assured her. "I've reached out to the lab technician again, asking if they have any documentation or recordings that might help, and I'm trying to get to talk, though so far he's lawyered up and refusing to comment." "What about?" asked. "Does he know about this yet?" "I'm not sure," Rachel admitted. "I was going to call him next, get his reaction. Do you want to be the one to tell him?" Thought about that, had called her earlier, asking if they could meet to talk. She had not given him an answer yet, had not decided whether she was ready to see him face to face. But now, with this new information, maybe it was time. "Yes," said, "I'll tell him, but I want you there as a witness, and I want it recorded in case he tries to deny knowing about any of this later." They arranged to meet the next day at a neutral location, a conference room in a hotel downtown. Arrived promptly, looking tired and worn in a way had never seen him. The past weeks had taken look surprised to see Rachel Martinez there, along with, but he took his seat without comment. Had positioned herself across the table from him, close enough to see his face clearly, far enough to maintain some emotional distance. Rachel had her laptop open, recording device ready, journalist's notebook at hand. Sat beside, a quiet show of support. Thank you for agreeing to meet, began, but held up her hand to stop him. Before you say anything, she said, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. There's something you need to know, something about those paternity tests and how they came to be wrong. She watched his face carefully as Rachel laid out everything they had discovered. The suspicious samples, the lab supervisor with unexplained deposits, the communications between that supervisor and Cassandra Rhodes. With each new revelation, his expression changed, moving from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. No, he said when Rachel finished. That's not possible. Cassandra has been with me for 7 years. She's my business partner, my friend. She wouldn't do something like this. The evidence suggests otherwise, Rachel said, turning her laptop around to show him copies of the bank records and phone logs she had obtained. These deposits into his account coincide almost exactly with the dates the paternity tests were processed, and these phone calls between him and Cassandra Rhodes's private number occurred just before and just after each test was run. Stared at the screen, his face pale. This could all be coincidence, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Maybe she was calling about something else, something business-related. Works at a genetic testing laboratory, said quietly. What business would Cassandra have with him? Had no answer. He sat back in his chair, running his hands through his hair, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, saw him look truly lost. Not angry, not certain, just lost. I need to talk to her, he finally said. I need to hear her explanation before I believe something like this. Be careful, Rachel warned. If she did orchestrate this, she's dangerous. She's willing to destroy lives to get what she wants. Don't confront her without protection, without witnesses. She's not dangerous, said automatically, then stopped himself. At least I didn't think she was. God, I don't know anything anymore. He looked at, and there was such pain in his eyes that despite everything, her heart ached for him. I'm so sorry, he said. If this is true, if Cassandra really did this, then I destroyed our marriage over a lie. I hurt you, humiliated you, threw you out of our home, all because I believed someone who was manipulating me. How can you ever forgive me for that? I don't know if I can, said honestly. But I think we both need to know the truth before we can figure out what comes next. Talk to Cassandra, get her to admit what she did, and then we'll decide where we go from here. Nodded slowly, he stood to leave, then paused. The baby, he said, is everything okay? Are you both healthy? It was the first time he had asked about the pregnancy since that night in the restaurant, felt tears prick her eyes. We're fine, she said. The baby is healthy and growing right on schedule. Good, said. That's good. I just want you to know, regardless of what happens between us, I'm going to be there for that child. I'm going to be the father I should have been from the start. After he left, the 3 women sat in silence, finally spoke. Do you think he knew? Do you think was in on it? No, said with certainty. You saw his face when Rachel showed him that evidence. He had no idea. Cassandra played him just like she played everyone else. So what happens now? Asked. Now we wait, Rachel said. We wait to see what does with this information, and we prepare for whatever comes next. What came next happened faster than anyone expected. Did not waste time. That very evening, he arranged a meeting with Cassandra Rhodes at his office. He brought his head of security with him, a former detective named James who had been with the company for 5 years. And he called Rachel Martinez, asking if she would like to be present with her recording equipment. If we're doing this, had told Rachel over the phone, then we're doing it right. I want everything documented. I want the truth on record. Cassandra arrived at the office at 7 o'clock, clearly annoyed at being summoned on such short notice. She was a striking woman in her early 40s, with sharp features and sharper intelligence reflected in her dark eyes. She had built her reputation on being unflappable, on seeing 10 moves ahead in any business negotiation. But tonight, walking into his office to find him there with his security chief and a journalist she recognized, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. What's this about? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. I thought we were meeting to discuss the merger timeline. Sit down, Cassandra, said, and something in his tone made her comply immediately. We need to talk about some things that have come to light, things concerning my wife and the paternity tests I had run several weeks ago. Cassandra's expression did not change, but Rachel noticed her hands tighten slightly on the arms of her chair. I don't know what you're talking about. Your personal life is your business. I've stayed out of it. Have you? Pulled out his tablet and brought up the documents Rachel had shared with him. Because I have evidence that suggests otherwise. Phone records showing multiple calls between you and a man named, who works at one of the labs that processed my paternity tests. Bank records showing large deposits into Mr.'s account that he can't adequately explain. And a statement from a lab technician saying that the samples I submitted were flagged as suspicious, but processed anyway at your insistence. That's ridiculous, Cassandra said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. Why would I have anything to do with your paternity tests? That's what I want to know, said, leaning forward. So I'm going to ask you directly, and I want the truth. Did you pay to falsify my paternity test results? The silence that followed was profound. Cassandra looked then at James, then at Rachel with her recording equipment. She was calculating, Rachel could see it, weighing her options, trying to determine if there was a way out of this that did not involve admitting guilt. Finally, she laughed. It was a harsh, bitter sound. You're so smart, so brilliant at reading business situations, but you're completely blind when it comes to people. Yes, I paid him. I paid all three of them actually, supervisors at each of the labs you used. It wasn't even that hard. People are surprisingly willing to compromise their ethics for the right price. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard, making sure every word was being captured. James had gone very still, his cop instincts on high alert, and looked like he had been physically struck. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Cassandra, why would you do this? We've worked together for 7 years. I trusted you. You trusted me? Cassandra repeated, and there was something dark in her voice now, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Yes, you trusted me to build your company, to make you billions, to work 80-hour weeks while you went home to your perfect wife and your perfect life. Do you know what it's like, to be the brilliant woman behind the successful man? To know that you're the reason for his success, but to watch him get all the credit, all the recognition, all the rewards. I've always given you credit, protested. You're my partner, my equal in this company. Your equal? Cassandra laughed again. I own 40% of this company, you own 60%. When we go public with this merger, you're going to walk away with billions more than me, despite the fact that half the innovations that made us successful came from my mind. And when the investors look at who's leading this company, whose name is on the door, whose face is on the magazine covers, it's yours, never mine. So this was about money? Asked. About recognition. You destroyed my marriage, you hurt my wife, you tried to separate me from my child, all because you felt underappreciated. It wasn't just about feeling underappreciated, Cassandra snapped. The investors were nervous about your marriage, did you know that? They worried that if you and divorced, she'd go after your shares in the company. They worried about instability, about divided loyalties. The merger was at risk because of your personal life. So you decided to end my personal life for me, said, and there was fury building in his voice now. You decided to play God with my marriage. I decided to protect what I'd built, Cassandra countered. This company is as much mine as it is yours, and I wasn't going to let it be destroyed because you couldn't keep your personal affairs in order. If was out of the picture, divorced and disgraced for cheating, the investors would see you as a victim, as someone who had been betrayed. They'd rally around you, not worry about you. And maybe, in time, you'd realize that the person who had been there all along, the person who truly understood you and your vision, was me. The implications of her words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Rachel felt her journalist's instincts kick into high gear. This was bigger than she had realized. This was not just about sabotaging a marriage. This was about a woman who had convinced herself that she deserved not just the business success, but the man himself. You wanted me, said slowly, working through it. All this time you've been in love with me. Love is a ridiculous word for what we could have had, Cassandra said. I'm talking about a true partnership, two minds working as one, both in business and in life. No pretty little wife who contributes nothing but looks good at charity events. Just us building an empire together. Is not, said, his voice dangerous now. She's my wife, she's carrying my child, and you tried to take her away from me based on a lie. I was trying to give you what you really needed, Cassandra insisted. But you were too blind to see it. You were so caught up in your little domestic fantasy that you couldn't recognize the person who was actually your equal standing right in front of you. You're not my equal, said coldly. An equal would not manipulate and deceive. An equal would not destroy innocent people to get what they want. You're a sociopath, Cassandra, and you're fired. The words seemed to shock Cassandra out of her passionate speech. You can't fire me. I own 40% of this company. I can fire you from your position as COO, said. And I'm going to. Effective immediately, you're removed from all operational decisions. You'll retain your shares because I can't legally take those from you, but you'll have no say in how this company is run. And I'm going to make sure every investor, every partner, every single person in our industry knows exactly what you did and why. You'll destroy the merger, Cassandra said, and for the first time there was real fear in her voice. If this gets out, the investors will walk away, we'll lose everything. Then we lose everything, said. But I'm not going to build a company on lies and manipulation, and I'm certainly not going to work with someone who would do what you've done. Cassandra stood up, her face flushed with anger. You're making a mistake. Without me, this company will fall apart. You need me, you've always needed me. What I need, said, is people I can trust, people with integrity, people who won't destroy lives for their own gain, and that's clearly not you. James stepped forward. Ms. Rhodes, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. If you refuse, I'll call the police and have you escorted out. Cassandra looked at each of them in turn, her expression moving through a range of emotions, anger, disbelief, calculation, and finally resignation. Fine, she said. But this isn't over. I have lawyers too. I have rights as a shareholder. You can't just push me out. Watch me, said. After Cassandra left, escorted by building security, sat down heavily in his chair. He looked exhausted, drained in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Rachel gave him a moment before speaking. I have everything recorded, she said. Her full admission, her motives, everything. This is enough to press charges if you want to. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe more. I want to talk to first, said. She deserves to know what happened. She deserves to decide what we do next. Rachel nodded and began packing up her equipment. As she did, spoke again. Ms. Martinez, I want to thank you. If you hadn't investigated this, if you hadn't pushed for the truth, I would never have known what really happened. I would have gone on believing my wife had betrayed me. Don't thank me, Rachel said. She's the one who believed in from the start. She's the one who convinced me to dig deeper. After Rachel left with her explosive recording, sat alone in his office for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called. It's done, he said when she answered. Cassandra confessed to everything. Rachel has it all on tape. And I need to see you. I need to apologize properly face to face for everything I put you through. They met at the hotel where was staying, in a small conference room away from prying eyes. Brought flowers, a gesture that felt inadequate but was all he could think to do. When walked in, he saw that she had lost weight, that there were dark circles under her eyes, that the past weeks had taken a visible toll. I'm so sorry, he said before she could speak. I'm sorry for not believing you, for humiliating you, for throwing away 3 years of marriage without giving you a chance to defend yourself. I'm sorry for being so blind, so stupid, so easily manipulated. Sat down across from him, her hands folded on the table. Tell me everything, she said. I want to know exactly what Cassandra said and why she did it. Told her about the meeting, about Cassandra's confession, about her twisted logic and her belief that she deserved both his business success and his romantic attention. He watched his face as he spoke, saw the range of emotions that crossed it, anger, hurt, disgust, and finally, a kind of sad understanding. She was in love with you, said when he finished. All those years working together, she fell in love with you and convinced herself that I was standing in the way of what should have been hers. It wasn't love, said firmly. Love doesn't destroy, love doesn't manipulate and deceive. Whatever Cassandra felt, it wasn't love. It was obsession, possession, but not love. They sat in silence for a moment, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. What happens now, with us, I mean, do we try to fix this? Do we go back to the way things were? I don't think we can go back, admitted. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken, but maybe we can move forward. Maybe we can build something new, something stronger, because we'll have been tested and survived. I want to believe that, said. But I need you to understand something. When you chose to believe those test results over me, when you made that scene in the restaurant, you broke something fundamental. You showed me that when things get hard, when evidence seems to point in one direction, you won't give me the benefit of the doubt. You won't trust in our relationship enough to question whether something might be wrong. You're right, said, and I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to prove to you that I'll do better next time. Maybe you start by showing me, suggested. Not with words or promises, but with actions. Show me that you're willing to fight for us even when it's hard. Show me that you're willing to believe in me, even when the evidence seems damning. I will, promised. Whatever it takes for however long it takes, I'll prove to you that I can be the husband you deserve. The story broke wide open 2 days later when Rachel Martinez published her full investigation, complete with the recording of Cassandra Rhodes's confession. The article went viral immediately, shared millions of times across social media platforms. News outlets around the world picked it up. Talk shows discussed it. Legal experts weighed in on what charges Cassandra might face. Business analysts debated what this would mean for Wellington's company and the pending merger. Public opinion, which had been so quick to condemn, swung dramatically in the other direction. People who had called her a cheater and worse now expressed outrage on her behalf. The restaurant where the confrontation had taken place issued a statement apologizing for not intervening. Several of her friends who had abandoned her in her time of need tried to reach out, offering awkward apologies that politely but firmly declined. The lab supervisor who had been paid to falsify the test results was arrested and charged with fraud and conspiracy. He quickly agreed to a plea deal in exchange for testifying against Cassandra Rhodes. The other two supervisors at the other labs were similarly charged, and they too agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. Cassandra herself was arrested at her home 3 days after the recording was made public. She was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and several other crimes related to her manipulation of the paternity tests. Her lawyers argued that she had been under extreme stress, that the pressure of the merger had affected her judgment, but prosecutors were not sympathetic. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated campaign to destroy a marriage and deceive a man about his own child. The merger that Cassandra had worked so hard to protect fell apart completely. The investment firm their offer, citing concerns about the company's leadership and stability. Other potential investors backed away, worried about the negative publicity. Wellington's company, which had been valued at billions just weeks ago, saw its stock price plummet, but did not seem particularly concerned about the business losses. He told reporters that some things were more important than money, that he had learned a valuable lesson about what really mattered in life. His focus now was on his family, on rebuilding his relationship with, and on preparing to be a father. True to his word, gave space and time. He did not pressure her to move back home, did not rush her into reconciliation. Instead, he showed up. He came to her prenatal appointments, sitting quietly in the waiting room until she invited him in. He sent her thoughtful gifts, not expensive jewelry or designer clothes, but things that showed he was paying attention to what she actually needed and wanted. Books she had mentioned wanting to read. Comfortable maternity clothes in her favorite colors. Ginger tea for her morning sickness. He also started seeing a therapist, working through his own issues of trust and control. He recognized that his readiness to believe the worst had come from somewhere deeper, from insecurities and fears that had nothing to do with her. He wanted to address those things, to become a better person and a better partner. For her part was also doing the work. She went to counseling too, processing the trauma of what she had been through. The public humiliation, the betrayal, the fear and uncertainty of those weeks when everyone believed she was lying. It was not something that would heal overnight, and she was honest with about that. "Some days I'm so angry with you I can barely look at you," she told him one afternoon as they sat in a park near her cousin's house. "Other days I remember why I fell in love with you, and I want to believe we can fix this. It's confusing and exhausting." "I know," said, "and I'm sorry that you have to go through this confusion because of what I did, but I'm grateful that you're willing to try it all. A lot of people wouldn't even give me that chance." "I'm not doing it just for you," said, her hand resting on her belly, which was now visibly swollen with the growing baby. "I'm doing it for our child. Every kid deserves to have both parents in their life if it's possible. But you need to understand that trying doesn't mean succeeding. We might do all the work, go to all the counseling, and still realize that we can't get past this." "I understand," said, "and if that happens, I'll respect your decision, but I'm going to fight for us every single day until then." As the weeks passed and pregnancy progressed, they slowly found their way back to each other. It was not the same as before. The easy trust and confidence were gone, replaced by something more cautious and deliberate. But in some ways, it was better. They talked more now, really talked about their feelings and fears and expectations. They did not take each other for granted anymore. Watched this transformation with satisfaction. She had continued to stay in touch with, and the two women had developed a real friendship despite their different circumstances. Had tried to give money as a thank you for everything she had done, but had refused. "You don't owe me anything," had said. "I just did what felt right," but had found other ways to show her gratitude. She had connected with resources for her younger brother, who was struggling in school. She had written letters of recommendation when applied for scholarships to continue her education. She had become a mentor and a friend, someone could turn to for advice and support. When Rachel Martinez won a journalism award for her investigative reporting on the case, she made sure to mention both, and in her acceptance speech. "This story is a reminder that truth matters," Rachel said, "that we should always question easy narratives and simple villains, and that sometimes the most important witnesses are the ones nobody expects, the ones who have nothing to gain except the satisfaction of doing what's right." 6 months after that night in the restaurant, gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She had decided to name her Hope because she represented a new beginning, a second chance, hope for a better future. Was there for the birth, holding his hand, crying when he first saw his daughter's face. And when the nurse placed Hope in his arms, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, he looked at with such love and gratitude that for the first time in months, she felt certain they were going to be okay. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for our daughter. Thank you for not giving up on us." Reached out and touched Hope's tiny hand, which immediately wrapped around her finger with surprising strength. "Thank you for coming back," she said softly, "for fighting for us, for showing me that people can change and grow." They brought Hope home to a house that felt different now, had made changes, wanting to start fresh. He had donated or thrown away reminders of Cassandra and the business empire they had built together. He had scaled back his work hours dramatically, determined to be present for his family in a way he had not been before. The company was rebuilding slowly with new leadership and a new direction, but was no longer obsessed with being the biggest and the richest. He had learned that lesson the hard way. Came to visit when Hope was 2 weeks old, bringing a hand-crocheted baby blanket that her grandmother had made years ago and that had been saving for someone special. Cried when she opened the gift, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. "I want Hope to know your story when she's old enough," told as they sat together watching the baby sleep. "I want her to know that when everyone else had given up on her mother, when everyone else had decided I was guilty, you chose to believe in me. You saved our family, you really did." "I didn't do it alone," said, embarrassed by the praise. "Rachel did the investigation. You never stopped fighting for the truth," came to his senses eventually. "But you were the catalyst," insisted. "You were the one who saw past the scandal and the gossip to the person underneath. You were the one who reminded me that truth has a way of coming out, just like your mother said. I'll never forget that." As for Cassandra Rhodes, she was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Her lawyers appealed, arguing that the punishment was too harsh for what they characterized as a crime of passion, but the appeals were. She lost her shares in his company, which were sold to pay restitution to for the emotional distress and damage to her reputation. She lost her professional credentials, her reputation, and her freedom. But perhaps the greatest punishment was that she had to watch from prison as and rebuilt their lives together. News articles and social media posts about their reconciliation, about Hope's birth, about their family's happiness, all of it must have been torture for a woman who had believed she could engineer a different outcome. Never visited Cassandra in prison. He never wrote to her or took her calls. As far as he was concerned, she had ceased to exist the moment she confessed to what she had done. He had no sympathy for her, no compassion for her situation. She had tried to destroy his family, and he would never forgive her for that. A year after Hope was born, and renewed their wedding vows in a small, private ceremony attended only by close family and friends. Was there, along with Rachel Martinez and Maya, his friend from the medical lab. Hope, now a chubby, happy 1-year-old, was dressed in a tiny white dress and spent most of the ceremony trying to grab handfuls of flowers from the decorations. During the ceremony, and each spoke about what they had learned over the past year and a half. About trust and forgiveness, about truth and perseverance, about the importance of believing in the people you love even when circumstances suggest you should not. "I learned that trust is not something you give once and then forget about," said, looking into his eyes. "It's something you choose every day, something you build and rebuild and protect. And I promise you that every day for the rest of my life I will choose to trust you, to believe in you, to stand beside you no matter what comes. I learned that forgiveness is not about forgetting or pretending something didn't hurt," said, her voice steady despite her tears. "It's about choosing to move forward anyway, about deciding that the love and the partnership we have is worth fighting for, worth working for, worth believing in. And I choose you. Every day I choose you. When they kissed, sealing their renewed commitment, the small gathering applauded. And watching from the back row, felt her eyes fill with tears. She thought about that night in the restaurant, about the broken woman she had chosen to believe in, about the journey that had led them all to this moment. Her mother had been right. Truth really did have a way of coming out. But sometimes it needed help. Sometimes it needed people willing to stand up and speak out, to question easy narratives, to believe in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, sought out, "I need to talk to you," he said, leading her to a quiet corner. "I've been wanting to say this for a while now, but I wasn't sure how. You saved my family. When I was being an absolute fool, when I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me, you saw something I couldn't see. You believed in when no one else would, including me. I can never repay that debt." "You don't owe me anything," started to say, but held up his hand. "Please let me finish. I've set up a trust fund for your education, full tuition for wherever you want to go, whatever you want to study. And I've arranged for your brother to attend a private school with programs specifically designed to help kids who struggle academically. These are not debts, and you're not obligated to accept them. But I wanted to do something meaningful, something that might make a real difference in your life the way you made a difference in ours." Was speechless. She had never expected anything like this, had never wanted any kind of reward for doing what she felt was right. But looking at his earnest face, at the gratitude shining in his eyes, she realized that refusing would hurt him, that he needed to do this, needed to give back in some way. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know what else to say except thank you." "Say you'll stay in our lives," said. "Say you'll let hope grow up knowing the woman who helped bring her family back together. That's all I ask." "I can do that," said, smiling through her tears. As the celebration continued, as people danced and laughed and celebrated love and second chances, stood with hope in her arms, watching her husband dance with. She thought about everything they had been through, about the night her world had fallen apart in a crowded restaurant, about the long months of struggle and doubt that had followed. She thought about Cassandra Rhodes, sitting in a prison cell, having lost everything in her quest for something that was never meant to be hers. And she felt a complex mix of emotions about that. Anger, yes, at what Cassandra had done, but also a strange kind of pity, because Cassandra had been so focused on taking what she wanted that she had never stopped to build something of her own. She had been so obsessed with, and the company that she had never developed real relationships, never created a life that had meaning beyond business success. Did not want to be like that. She did not want to be someone who measured her worth by what she had or who she was connected to. She wanted to be someone who built meaningful relationships, who contributed something positive to the world, who raised her daughter to be strong and kind and true to herself. With that in mind, had enrolled in graduate school, working toward a degree in social work. She wanted to help other women who found themselves in impossible situations, who were being accused and judged and abandoned. She wanted to create programs that would support them, believe in them, and help them find their way to truth and justice. It was ambitious, especially as a new mother, but had learned that she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. She had survived public humiliation, betrayal, and the near destruction of her marriage. She had stood up for herself and her child in the face of overwhelming opposition. She could handle graduate school. 3 years after that night at the restaurant, opened her own nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women who were being falsely accused or wrongly judged. She called it the Hope Foundation, after her daughter, and its mission was to provide legal support, counseling, and advocacy for women who needed someone to believe in them. Was on the board of directors, having graduated from college with honors and a degree in psychology. She still kept in touch with Rachel Martinez, who continued to investigate stories of injustice and corruption. And she often thought about that night when she had made the decision to believe a stranger, to offer kindness when judgment would have been easier. One evening, at a fundraiser for the Hope Foundation, a young woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said. "I read about what happened to you, about how you were accused and how you fought back. I'm going through something similar right now, and knowing your story, knowing that you survived and came out stronger, it gives me hope. It makes me believe I can do this too." Took the woman's hands in hers. "You can," she said with certainty. "It won't be easy, and there will be days when you want to give up, But the truth matters, and you matter, and there are people who will stand with you. You just have to find them and let them help. As the evening wore on, as donors wrote checks and speakers shared stories of survival and triumph, stood with hope on his shoulders, watching his wife in her element. She was radiant, confident, completely transformed from the broken woman who had sat alone in a restaurant while strangers judged her. "Daddy, why is Mommy crying?" Hope asked, pointing at, who had indeed become emotional during one particularly moving speech. "Those are happy tears, sweetheart," explained. "Mommy is crying because she's helping people, and that makes her happy." "I want to help people too," Hope declared with the absolute certainty of a 3-year-old. "You will," promised. "You come from a long line of strong women who help people, your mommy and everyone here tonight. They're all showing you how to be brave and kind and true. You're going to do amazing things, Hope. I know you are." Later that night, after the fundraiser ended and they returned home and sat on their back porch while Hope slept inside. The night was quiet, peaceful, so different from the chaos and pain of those early days after the confrontation. "Do you ever think about that night?" asked, "at the restaurant?" "Sometimes," admitted. "But not as much as I used to. It's part of our story now, but it's not the whole story. We're so much more than that one terrible night." "I'm grateful," said, which is a strange thing to say about almost losing my family. But that experience, as painful as it was, showed me what really matters. It showed me who I want to be, and it brought people into our lives like Rachel, who we never would have known otherwise. "I'm grateful too," said, "not for what Cassandra did, but for what we learned about ourselves and each other, for the strength I didn't know I had, for the community we've built, for Hope and everything she represents." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the city, there were other people facing their own crises, their own moments of truth. Other restaurants where dramas were unfolding, other lives being tested and challenged. But here, in this moment, there was peace. The truth had come out just as Smother had promised it would. Justice, imperfect but real, had been served. And a family had been broken and rebuilt, stronger for the mending. It was not a perfect ending because real life rarely provides those. But it was a good ending, a true ending, an ending that honored the struggle and celebrated the triumph. And sometimes, thought as she rested her head on shoulder, that was more than enough. That was everything. In the years that followed, the Hope Foundation grew and flourished, helping hundreds of women find their voice and their power. Went on to become a therapist specializing in trauma recovery. Rachel Martinez won more awards for her investigative journalism, always focusing on stories of injustice and corruption. And the Wellington family, and Hope with another baby on the way, built a life rooted in truth, trust, and the kind of love that survives being tested. The story became something of a legend in the city, told and retold with various embellishments and interpretations. But those who had been there, who had lived through it, knew the real story. They knew about the night a billionaire confronted his pregnant wife in a crowded restaurant. They knew about the judgment and the gossip that followed. And they knew about a young waitress who chose to believe when everyone else chose to condemn. That waitress, that moment of belief, had changed everything. It had set in motion a chain of events that uncovered truth, delivered justice, and ultimately saved a family. It was a reminder that every person has power, that every choice matters, that one act of kindness or courage can ripple out in ways we never anticipate. And in a world that often felt cruel and cynical, where people were quick to judge and slow to believe, that was a story worth remembering. That was a story worth passing on. That was a story that gave people hope that truth could triumph, that love could endure, and that sometimes, just sometimes, everything would work out exactly as it should. The end. Nodded slowly. "Okay, but we're not just picking up where we left off. We're starting over, dadding, rebuilding trust, going to counseling if we need to, and I'm not moving back into the house right away. I need time to figure out if I can really forgive you for this." "I understand," said. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait their toll on him too," she realized. Whatever else he might be, he was still human, still capable of being hurt his lawyer and another man did not recognize. Explain the impulse, but something told her it might be important later. Something told her this story was far from over, and that the truth, whatever it might be, was still waiting to be discovered.